Hello! I've been using the Sony ZV-E10 as my primary filmmaking camera for the last year and a half. It's been a solid camera for me, and when I decide to upgrade, it's pretty likely that I'll stay within the Sony ecosystem. I'll share my experiences with the camera and include footage from some of my films so you can judge for yourself if this might be a good camera for you. Before we continue, I want to make it clear that this is not a sponsored video. Sony has no idea who I am, nor should they based on my subscriber count. Of course, you don't know me either, which might be important in order to know if my experiences will be helpful to you. So here's some information to show where I'm coming from. I'm an indie micro-budget filmmaker in Newfoundland. I use the ZV-E10 for narrative films, documentary interviews, and B-roll footage. My main lens is the Tamron 17-70 f2.8, and it basically stays on the camera. This lens captures a nice image, it's got pretty good reach, and the stabilization is alright. I pretty much stay in the f2.8 the entire time and use an ND filter when necessary. Additionally, I'm not a vlogger or a streamer, so I can't comment on either of those scenarios. I also don't use it for photos, so I can't comment on its utility as a hybrid camera. I am also not a cinematographer, which means that my needs are pretty specific. Capturing footage isn't the only thing I'm focused on, so any images I get have to look good straight out of the camera, and the autofocus needs to be solid. Before we get to the footage, one last thing I want to get out of the way very quickly. Even though you can make films with the ZV-E10, and even though I'm going to give you some reasons why the ZV-E10 was a great camera for me, it is not a cinema camera. It simply lacks many features that are important within the film industry. I could go into all the differences between mirrorless consumer cameras and proper cinema cameras, but there's a YouTuber called Wolfcrow who's done a much better job than I ever could on the subject. The link to his video is in the description below. So, what can the combination of the ZV-E10 and the Tamron 17-70 give you? Well, take a look. This is the behind-the-scenes featurette for Shanawdithit, a Beothuk story. For an inexpensive camera, the ZV-E10 does a good job with the image if you're able to put effort into the lighting. The interviews generally all look good with a variety of setups, whether it was softboxes, or bounced lights, or some combination of bounce and diffusion. The B-roll using available light is serviceable, not outstanding, but acceptable. This is footage from Bergerdosh Industries, which will be a part of an upcoming anthology thriller film called Wrong Turns. Now, I'll be honest, the images aren't quite as clean as they were in the Shanawdithit BTS. A whole lot of things fell through in the Bergerdosh Industries production, including losing access to the lighting kit we needed, so we had to throw something together using a practical as our key and whatever basic lights we could scrounge up. I do like the look of some of the shots though, and I think it does pretty well for an entry-level mirrorless camera. This is from Trevor, another short from Wrong Turns. This time, Ben Power, a filmmaker in St. John's, was handed the reins as the DOP, and because of that, you can see some really nice images in this. Again, I think it does pretty well for an inexpensive camera. There are a couple of rough shots here in terms of noise in the shadows, but overall I'm really happy with it. Finally, because it's important to stay humble, I'll show you a film where I didn't do all that great. This is a short stay in Stephenville, my first project with this camera. I don't have a good excuse for shooting the wrong color temperature, so I won't waste your time giving you a bad one. That said, I do like the film, warts and all. The autofocus was reliable, and the image was pretty good, if not fantastic. The location was a bit small, so I didn't get quite the amount of separation that I would have liked, but that's on me, not the camera. Here are my thoughts on the ZV-E10 as a whole. This is a good camera for the price. While I am using a pretty solid lens, the camera performs well with other lenses, something you can see for yourself if you do a search for quote-unquote cinematic videos on YouTube, where you can see what others have been able to do with it. I was fortunate enough to see the Shanawdithit behind-the-scenes featurette on the big screen in Stephenville, and the images held up really well. The autofocus is great. I honestly never have to worry about it, and you can even use it to get away with the equivalent of focus pulls if you set things up right. When it comes to stabilization, this is tough for me to say. I don't use Sony's Catalyst Browse software for my handheld stuff, because I'm one of those wannabe cinema verite types who doesn't care if the footage is a bit shaky. There's a YouTuber called Mark Bennett who runs a channel called Camera Crisis, and if you want to learn more about the ZV-E10's limits with stabilization, I recommend you check him out. There will be a link to his channel below. I pretty much only shoot in 1080p, which is important to note because that means I don't shoot 4K, and that means I don't really push the limits of what the camera can handle temperature-wise. Either Gerald Undone or Mark Bennett can probably help you out there, and again, links below. The low light on Sony cameras is legendary, even if you're not using the A7S series, but I have to admit I've not pushed the camera as far as it can go. That said, if you look at this Bergerdosh Industries footage, you can get an idea of how it might perform in darker scenarios. The rolling shutter is a bit rough, so I tend not to use whip pans, which stinks because I love using them as a technique to hide cuts sometimes. The in-body sound is, well, it's in-body sound, so it's underwhelming. I use an external recorder with a shotgun mic for that. The camera is not weather sealed, which is unfortunate because I live in Newfoundland and we have all the weather here and then some. The footage is 8-bit color, which is Well, there are cameras twice the price of the ZV-E10 and they have 8-bit colors, so it's probably a bit much to ask for an entry-level camera to have 10-bit. A quick aside, at the time of this recording there's been some buzz circulating that the ZV-E10 Mark II might be coming out soon, so some of these things might be addressed. Details are still hard to come by though. I can't imagine that a Mark II model would fix all of these things and still remain priced like an entry-level camera, so maybe this video can help somebody considering picking up the original ZV-E10 used. In any case, in looking back on the last few points, I feel kind of bad because it probably sounds like this isn't a great camera. I actually do think it's a really good first camera if you want to be a filmmaker. I was actually considering getting it a few years ago and opted for the Panasonic G85 instead, and while I do like what the G85 is capable of, my use case basically demanded that I needed something that could do autofocus, so I had to switch to Sony anyway. I've not been disappointed. If anything, my only very minor regret is buying the Tamron lens instead of getting a faster, mid-range prime from Sony that could take advantage of the clear image zoom feature, and which would be useful on a full-frame camera if I decided to upgrade to one. The Tamron 17-70 is an APS-C lens, which means it either needs to go onto an APS-C body like the A6700 or the FX30, or else, if I put it on a full-frame camera, I'd have to shoot in APS-C mode. Now, that said, I'm still really happy with the footage I'm getting on this camera with this lens, and I can live with the choice I made. I don't plan on switching lenses anytime soon, and it'll be the lens I use to finish up the Wrong Turns feature. Unfortunately, if you want more ZV-E10 footage to check out, well, until I finish Wrong Turns, the Shanawdithit behind the scenes featurette is the only one of my films that's going to be online for a while. As I film more stuff for the feature though, I'll post more samples so you can get a good look at it. I just wish there was some way for you to know when that footage got posted. If by some chance you think you want to take a chance on the Sony ZV-E10 or the Tamron 17-70 f2.8 lens, I've got affiliate links below for Canadians. Just keep in mind that the Sony ZV-E10 might be having a Mark II coming out soon, and the Tamron 17-70 f2.8 is an APS-C lens, not a full-frame lens. It's important to me that your buying decision is based on the best information possible. In the meantime, if anybody watching this has actually done a short film or doc with the ZV-E10, please link to it in the comments below. I'd love to look at it and see what your footage is like. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope you stick around.